This flip is a little bit more uncommon than normal because I don't do custom flips often, but my close friend Matt reached out to me and wanted me to flip this dresser for him, so I could not say no. I usually like to have 100% creative control on my flips, but the dresser was only $100 and he picked it up and said, "Can you do something with it?" So I said, let's do it. So come along for the full transformation. The plan for this dresser was to do part wood and then part paint to really give a little bit of personality to the space that it's going to be used in. To get started, I removed all the drawers just to make it a little bit easier to work with, and then I started with a 120 grit sandpaper. This will really just help get rid of all that old stain without being too harsh on the surface. My plan here was to start with the 120 grit and see how much of that old stain I can get off before moving on to my higher grits, which I would use in progression to 150, then 180, and finishing off with a 220 grit. If you've seen my furniture flipping 101 masterclass on sanding, you would know that you have to be really careful on these side pieces because they tend to sand down a lot quicker than flat top surfaces. The 120 grit did a really good job of removing all that old stain, so now it was time to finally move up to my higher sandpaper grits, which will really work into the grain more and get rid of any shadows or any effects that may be left over. As you saw before, Matt and I decided to do the body of the dresser in a green paint, so I wanted to just scuff sand this part to ensure that my primer and my paint would stick perfectly to the surface and not run at all during the application process. Since this part of the dresser had a lot more trim pieces that jutted out and weren't totally smooth surfaces, especially on these drawer fronts, I decided to use a foam pad instead. This type of sanding pad has a lot more flexibility when it comes to scuff sanding any surface because it's able to form and mold over those curves and edges, especially on these door fronts. As you can see, anywhere where I'm going in with paint, I'm just doing a scuff sand, so I'm not trying to take any of that old stain off. I'm just trying to make little tiny micro scratches in the surface to help that paint and primer stick to it. So there's no need to go all the way down to bare wood on this step. Sanding all complete, I was finally ready to get into the pre-stain, which unfortunately is where we hit our first obstacle. I had a sense when I got this piece that it actually wasn't solid wood and was just a thin veneer, and this pre-stain really highlighted the areas where that veneer is bled through. Here you can see all the spots where the veneer is worn through, and this is not going to look good if I go in with a stain, so we're actually going to pivot and do a faux wood grain on the top of this piece, but that's going to have to be set aside for later. So now I'm just getting everything wiped down from all the sawdust that was left over from sanding. This step in your paint prep is crucial because if you have any sawdust left over, your primer is not going to stick and runs the chance of chipping or peeling after you already paint the piece. Now, a really helpful hack that I learned recently is to actually tape around the edges of your drawer fronts. What this does is allow you to do all your spray painting and using your paint gun with the drawers in, so you don't have to worry about any overspray into the actual dresser. By having your drawers taped off, you could do all your initial spraying with your primer, and then all you have to do is just pull the drawers out half an inch or so, and you could also reach all the corners and trims around the drawers, so you could do everything in one easy step. Since we are doing that faux wood grain on the top, I'm also priming that as well. This is just actually an oil-based primer, which ensures there's no bleed through or stains coming through the surface that may affect our paint later on. After letting our first layer of primer dry, it is crucial that you go in and actually do a really high grit sand on that primer before painting. Using a 400 to 600 grit foam pad and just running it over the primer makes it feel silky smooth and gets rid of any of that texture or grittiness, so when you put your paint on, you get that factory finish that you're looking for. Now, I will be painting the top later on, but I'm not going to be painting it in the green tone that we're going for, so I just taped that off to cover it. Now, I told Matt to go to Lowe's and pick out a paint color that he likes, and he came across this one called Prairie Sage, which personally, I should have said something in the beginning because I already knew it was going to be way too light from what we wanted originally. But I said, hey, trust the process. If he went there and he picked it out, he has to like it. So I said, let's just move on and get this paint mixed up. I also thinned it out with a little bit of water because I'm going to be using it through my paint gun. I'm building a custom base for this dresser, so I wanted to get my initial measurements before I started painting just to make sure they were as accurate as possible. I had my paint gun all loaded up and started off with the first coat. I put this initial layer on and thought, oh my god, this is really light, but again, I said, well, he went and picked it out, so he has to like it, so let's just move on and see, maybe it'll dry a little bit darker. I feel like we initially agreed on a much much more foresty green that was a lot more deeper tones than this one, but the paint gun was working great and the layers looked really smooth and clean, so I thought as long as my actual application process is right, maybe it'll come out just how he wanted it to. I applied 3 layers of this paint and then let it sit overnight to dry, but before that I also wanted to pre-cut all the pieces I needed for my new base. I got a couple inexpensive trim pieces from Lowe's that would work perfectly to build a custom base. It seems a little bit intimidating, but once you do it once or twice, this process really is pretty beginner friendly. All I'm doing is cutting my 4 pieces based on the measurements that I initially did, and also removing 3 inches from each of those measurements since the actual wood piece itself is 1.5. I got all my pieces cut and ready to assemble tomorrow, and then what would you know, Matt came back and did not like this color. We actually were laughing so hard because he says that it looked like Tinkerbell threw up on it, and I could not agree more. He literally felt so bad, but I said it's no worries, it's not that hard just to put another coat of paint on top. So I went back and picked a color myself that I thought represented the color that we originally agreed on. This new color is by Valspar in the color Boughs of Pine. It's a much darker, deeper green, which I really thought embodied the original image that we wanted to go off of. Just after the first few passes, I knew I hit the nail on the head with this color, and also it really wasn't that big of a deal because the color behind it was pretty close to that green shade anyway, so it just acted as a primer for my darker paint instead. I did 3 coats of this paint color as well, just to make sure that lighter green underneath was fully covered and the color was completely uniform. On bigger flips like this dresser, using a paint gun will save you so much time, and all you really have to do is wait for each coat to dry. And now it was time to move on and build our custom base. So if you remember, I pre-cut those pieces yesterday and also cut these little legs with a little bit of an angle on them just to help the shape and form look better on the dresser. Using some wood glue initially, I'm attaching the feet to the longer support beams and then just clamping those in place. What this does is I just will let it sit for 30 minutes, and then when I actually go in to attach them with screws, they're not wobbling around and I have a much more steady surface to work with. I like to use these specific screws when I'm building bases. They're called finishing screws, so when you drill them in, they actually go deeper past the head of the screw itself, so they create a little hole that makes it really easy to just fill them in after you're done screwing them. I'm doing the faux wood look on this base as well, so I'm gonna be painting it. That's why I don't mind leaving these little holes, because in a minute I'm actually gonna be using this Bondo spot putty to fill all those holes in. This stuff dries in just 15 minutes, so once it's dried, I could just paint over it and you won't even notice that there's any screw holes left in this base anyways. While I let that spot putty dry, I went ahead and removed all the covering on the top of the dresser just to get it ready for that faux wood graining. The first step of the faux wood graining process is to put a layer of neutral paint down, which will act as the base of your wood tone. Using a darker paint will give you a darker wood look, and a lighter paint a lighter wood look. Once that base layer of paint is dried, you want to go in with something called a wood glaze. I'll link it in the description. And then you also need a wood graining tool. What this is a little silicone mold that you just rock back and forth across the wood glaze, and it gives you this beautiful faux wood grain that you would never be able to tell isn't real wood. Now I know it does not look like solid wood right now. That's because down the line we're going to put another layer of wood glaze on top. So what this is doing is just creating that grain that you want under the second layer of the wood glaze. The nice thing about this process is it's pretty forgiving. So if you mess up your faux wood graining, you could actually just use your paintbrush and smooth out the wood glaze, and then use the wood graining tool and do it as many times over. It doesn't dry super fast if you're not working in direct sunlight, so you can give yourself 3 or 4 tries until you really like the wood grain that comes out. I wanted to get the base done first because I actually have to flip the dresser over to attach it, and once I flip it back on its feet and do the faux wood graining on the top, I don't want to risk scratching or scraping the faux wood grain on the top layer. I left the original feet on while I was painting because it just helped elevate the piece off of the grass, but now it's time to remove them and actually attach that base that we created. Setting it down, I'm trying to get it as aligned, as straight as possible, but I also can put my first screw in and kind of push and pull it into the second screw to make sure it's perfectly attached. To secure it, I'm using the same finishing screws I used on the base, but don't really have to worry about filling these holes since it's going to be on the bottom of the dresser anyways, and no one's going to see it once it's flipped upright. I got the dresser brought back into the garage and flipped upright, and now it's time to repeat that same process of the faux wood graining on the top layer of the dresser. For this portion, I'm being hyper aware of the wood grain that I put down because the top layer is seen a lot more than the base, and it's something that's right at the forefront of the dresser. So I'm definitely going back and redoing the grain if I don't like it, just because I want this piece to be perfect and look great from all angles. Since this surface is a lot wider than the base, I'm actually using a bigger faux wood graining tool, and you could see just how insane that tool works with the wood glaze to make it look like real wood, when in reality it's just two different types of products paired together to make that solid wood look. In this section, you really could see how that second layer of wood glaze really brings everything together. What it does is it cools down that lighter paint underneath and then blends the darker wood grain that you just did all together to really give it that solid wood look that once it's dry, you honestly can't even tell that it's not solid wood. And now we're on the final home stretch. All that's left is to add new hardware that I actually grabbed on Amazon. It's an antique brass hardware, which if you see my videos, you know I love antique brass. I just think it pairs with everything so well, especially this green tone. Then as a quick reminder, here is where we originally started with this 5-drawer dresser, and the results are perfect. Luckily, I sent this over to Matt after I told him, let me pick the second paint color, and he absolutely loved how this thing came out. The green is a lot darker, but still has a lot of character to bring personality to the space and not make it look too muted. Then pairing that paint color with the beautiful faux wood grain base and top is just the perfect combo, and then adding those brass hardware pulls really just ties everything together. I really do love working with flips like these that come to me in really good condition but really just need a cosmetic update because it gives you a finished result that looks like it's factory fresh. Now I know my opinion was strong on that lighter green not being the one, but I want to know what you think of the two different greens that I chose and which one you like better for your space. So let me know down in the comments, and as always, I will see you guys in the next one.